Could you be connected to someone famous in history? Are you trying to trace a family member or think an ancestor is linked to a battle, royalty, maybe even a scandal? I'm Sian Williams, and we're trying to help people find their place in the past and perhaps learn something about our own. Welcome to My Family Secrets Revealed. We've gathered a team of historical and ancestry experts to solve intriguing family mysteries.
There is a possible connection with Polish royalty.
Yes.
After poring over birth records, doing DNA tests and building family trees,
We wanted to have a look at your DNA. You are 76% British.
they'll reunite people with long-lost relatives.
Can we share the castle?
Prove links to famous faces
We are actually related to him. That's incredible.
and solve family puzzles about long-lost relatives.
So it just kind of disappears from history.
There'll be scandal along the way.
She had an affair with a member of the high clergy.
Stories of heroism.
He really saw the underbelly of a world war.
It's a bit of an eye-opener, isn't it, this?
There'll also be unexpected reunions, tears of joy,
That's amazing.
and a chance for people to find out who their ancestors really were.
Quite a lot to discover.
That's the biggest shock. And the best one, too.
Today, the hope for a royal connection.
The same nose, eyes, chin. So it all kind of like fits.
The search for how an ancestor met his end.
He apparently died on the Lancastria.
And a dark secret hanging over a family.
She had 5 children, but I believe that the youngest child wasn't hers.
We're at King's Weston House in Bristol, a historic manor house in Somerset, where people from all over the UK have been gathering, eager to have their questions answered. There's a steady flow of visitors here, all hoping that their stories from the past can be brought right up to date.
I am trying to trace my family tree, and I'm trying to trace it on my mother's side.
I'm trying to find out about my grandfather's father.
I've gone back as far as 1730, and I sort of stuck there.
On the hunt for those answers today are our experts, historian and writer Tessa Dunlop.
And then the fourth bomb goes down what's known as the smokestack. Boof, detonates in the engine room, and what happens next? It explodes.
And taking on our first case, DNA expert Brad Argent. Theatre was hugely popular in the 19th century, with workers in the Industrial Revolution wanting to find some entertainment. Anne Macey's ancestors were right in the heart of the Victorian theatre world, but they also harboured a shameful family secret, and she's keen to find out more.
My name is Anne Macey. I live in Newport in South Wales. My great-grandmother was born Elizabeth Nathan. Her stage name was Bessie Nathan. She was an actress. She went all over the world acting. Bessie Nathan was an incredible woman. She began her acting career in 1874, and that was a time when women on the stage were considered perhaps one step above prostitutes. And she met this Irish actor, Charles Guilfoyle Seymour, and they married in 1879. She had 5 children. My grandmother was Margaret Annie, and my great-aunt was Harriet. Now, I found a newspaper item saying that 14-year-old Harriet had run away from home. And that was in 1894. There is nothing in the newspapers that says she came back. But in 1898, Bessie Hope is born. And suddenly, the whole family up sticks and leaves Manchester and moves to Newport. And they've got this new baby, Bessie Hope, who was registered by Charles Guilfoyle Seymour as his daughter. And I don't believe it. My theory is that Harriet ran off with an actor, and her mother put the notice in the newspaper to try and make her come back. But I don't think she did. Not straight away. And I think she went back home because she was pregnant with Bessie Hope. And her mother said, don't worry, we'll sort this out. And her mother decided that the only way to sort this was to bring Bessie Hope up as hers, as Harriet's sister, and to move away from where everybody knew them. If it's true, it's true. And if it's not true, I'll apologise. There's my question.
So, Anne, welcome. You've come here today to find out a little bit more about this handsome woman here.
This lady is Bessie Nathan, and she had, apparently, 5 children. But I believe that the youngest child wasn't hers. I believe that she was the daughter of my grandmother's sister. And I just want to find out if I'm right, basically.
So what do you know about Elizabeth or Bessie?
I know she was born in London in 1855. I know that she lied consistently about her age, that she married in 1879 in Liverpool, and she married an actor called Charles Guilfoyle Seymour. From then on, she was Bessie Nathan on stage. She was Bessie Guilfoyle. She was Bessie Seymour. She was Bessie Seymour Guilfoyle. And she lied about where she was born. She lied about how old she was. She was an actress. And as my Auntie Mew used to say, she went all over the world acting. And I don't think she could help herself, really.
You think she was an actor both on stage and off stage?
Yes. Oh, yes, totally.
So let's try and get a sense of what the family looks like. This is a family tree. So, Anne, here you are down the bottom. This is your grandmother, is that right? And then we can see right on the end here, we have Bessie. And you can see that gap between Harriet in 1880 and Bessie in 1896.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a what's going on.
Yes.
And Harriet runs away. Now, how old was Harriet when she ran away?
She was 14.
She was 14. She disappears for a couple of years, and then she comes back, and then Bessie appears on the scene. And here we have Bessie's birth record. And we can see here that she's definitely 1896. When Harriet ran away and when Bessie was born, they're very close.
Yes. And one of the things I've been trying to find out is the fact that Bessie Hope is born, she's registered in Chorlton, and they moved to Newport and opened a fancy goods bazaar.
Why do you think Harriet ran off?
She was appearing on the stage with her father and my grandmother, her sister. And I've got reviews as late as the end of November and early December 1894, when she's appearing in a play called The Way of the World, I think it was. And I think there was an actor. And I think he encouraged her and she ran off with him.
I wonder if her upbringing and, perhaps that she had quite an independent mother created in her a sense of independence and a strong sense of self, and she felt that it was quite okay for her to run off and do that.
I think if she was anything like her mother, she would have.
Yeah. So this document is the citizenship application for the daughter, Bessie Hope, or as she appears in the document, Holder, because she married an American soldier. And the link to America is really important because it's important for telling the story, right? And for getting to the truth as to where does Bessie fit in the family. And looking at your DNA and looking at the DNA of descendants of Bessie Hope in America, as your cousins, we're able to determine exactly where Bessie fits in the family. And Bessie Hope is definitely the daughter of Bessie Nathan.
She really is.
She really is.
But that's wonderful. So what was Harriet doing in those years then? No, that's fabulous. It's fabulous. It proves that it's right. That's good.
Bessie Nathan was telling the truth all along.
Excellent. It's brilliant.
Thank you so much for sharing this wonderful story and for bringing to life such a wonderful character. What a fantastic role model to have in your family.
She is the most amazing woman I've ever known. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you so much. I'm 3 inches off the ground and floating. I am just so excited because now I know. It's got to be more than 10 years that this question has been hanging over who she was, where she was in the generations. Because once you've had a thought, you can't get rid of it. And if you ever say it out loud, then that thought becomes, it becomes real. And finding the answer is important. Well, now I found the answer. It's been proved that Bessie Nathan had 5 children and that Bessie Hope was definitely her daughter. Marvellous. Really, really good.
Having arrived today thinking that her family kept a dark secret about Bessie Hope's real mother, Anne now leaves with DNA evidence proving that Bessie's mother was, in fact, the woman who raised her. Still to come, DNA expert Brad Argent looks at the fascinating life of a salty sea captain. Can he bring these descendants a new Fijian family?
It's beautiful, beautiful women. They're welcoming, he understands their culture. I cannot imagine him leading a monastic life in Fiji.
Historian Tessa Dunlop has stepped in to help Maureen Locke figure out one possible reason why her ancestor changed his name.
Who is that handsome man in your hand?
Yes, this is my grandfather, Ernest Locke. He's from Ireland.
Mm-hmm. And there's a conundrum, isn't there, surrounding his name?
Yes, that's correct. There was confusion because our family name is Locke, but at some point we believe he used Mullins, and we're a little bit confused of where that name came from.
Well, Maureen, we did extensive searches for an Ernest Locke, both in England and in Ireland, and we came up with very little. So we then decided to use the address you gave us. In Battersea, London.
Battersea, that's right.
And there we discovered he wasn't living alone. Ernest had company, had Cornelius, who we think was his brother, and there were 2 Upshires. Margaret, married to Leopold Upshire. Now, when we tracked back Margaret Upshire, it transpires that she was born Margaret Locke.
Oh, I see.
Okay. And then we were able to connect Ernest with Margaret. They were siblings. His sister got married and was still living with him with her husband.
I see.
And so we have an Ernest Locke and a Margaret Locke, and it so happens their mother's maiden name was Mullins.
I see.
Which explains why Ernest later on used the name Mullins, because it was kicking around in his family already. It was his mother's maiden name.
That's right.
Now, the question, of course, is why did Ernest jettison the name Locke and use his mother's maiden name Mullins? Therein lies the enigma. Now, we can't definitively say why he did that. We can't go into a young man's mind all that time ago. But I can tell you that Ernest was no choir boy. We had a rake around in his past. I think all young men would prefer that we didn't rake around in their past. But if you change your name, you're begging for attention, to be honest. He was a teenager in the late 1890s, and he got on the wrong side of the law. We find him drawn up in front of a judge with 2 other lads of a similar age, I think he was 17, being thoroughly reprimanded for roughing up an Italian ice cream vendor, for beating him up quite brutally, in fact. This wasn't without precedent. Immigrants were increasingly unpopular, overcrowded parts of the East End and inner city areas of London. Italians had come in considerable numbers from the middle of the 19th century, almost from often poor mountainous areas. They were distinctly different in some cases. They were Catholic. They were quite noisy sometimes. They were a bit kind of unusual looking. Yeah. Now, the judge saw 3 young lads and he gives them a real telling off. And he says, if you must be violent, for God's sake, join the army. And I think later on we know that he did just that.
Yes, he did indeed.
So all good in the end, Ernest.
Maureen now knows that Ernest most likely changed his name from Locke to Mullins to distance himself from his youthful misdemeanours and took the judge's advice to join the army. Next, a sister and brother searching for the missing pieces in the life of their seafaring ancestor.
My name is Ian Lockerbie Gaskell. This is my sister Valerie Moore. And we're here, basically, to look into the life and times of William Lockerbie.
A very remarkable man named William Lockerbie.
Our great grandfather. William Lockerbie was an extraordinary man. He was a great adventurer. He came down to Liverpool and went to sea. And he ended up marooned on islands in the Pacific.
William wrote a journal when he was marooned on Fiji about all his escapades, the skirmishes with various islands and that. And in the introduction, it is mentioned that he married a Fijian princess. I would really like to find out if that actually did happen.
Our connections with the maritime history is very strong in terms of the shipbuilding side, but what really fascinates us, I think, is William. He ended up becoming a ship owner and a merchant. Really, I'd love to know more about that. How he made his fortune as a merchant.
So Val, Ian, welcome.
Hello. Pleased to be here.
So we're here today to learn a little bit more about the wonderful William Lockerbie. You're going to find out now just how wonderful he was. But first of all, let's set the scene a little bit. How are you connected to William Lockerbie? This is your family tree. We'll get right back to William Lockerbie, your 3 times great-grandfather, and we can see that it's through the Gaskell connection. So tell me about the Gaskells and the Lockerbies.
Richard Luke Gaskell was in the boat building business in Liverpool, and he was also in partnership with Lockerbie. Richard also married his daughter Jane.
Now, Lockerbie's shipping empire was huge.
I think we found 4 boats that he owned over the period from about 1821.
Here is the evidence, right, connecting the Gaskells and the Lockerbies. Richard Luke Gaskell and Jane Lockerbie. And the occupations, you can see the Gaskells, shipwright, and Lockerbie, merchant.
Yep.
And it was a particularly prosperous union because from that came an empire. These are ships that we found were owned and managed by William Lockerbie in the Lloyd's registers. Now, as you can see, there's more than a few.
I'll say there is. Wow.
He's a man of means. Now, this starts in 1823.
Yeah.
Right.
This is amazing.
There's a ship.
Yeah. Are you saying that he owned these ships?
Managed and owned. So he may have managed some of them, he may have owned some of them.
Wow.
But the story of William Lockerbie goes back to Fiji. There's a journal of William Lockerbie's, and it makes for absolutely fascinating reading. It was one of these things that I couldn't put down because every page there is this adventure. He does find himself marooned in Fiji.
He was left there by this ship, Jenny, an American ship, with 6 American sailors and left to fend for himself.
Maybe he's stuck there, or maybe he chooses to stay there. It's a little bit uncertain. He finds himself in a position where he's captured by the natives, by one of the warring tribes. They negotiate with one of the tribes for release. And then collectively, they wage war on another tribe. Having the superior firepower, they are easily outnumbered. He's a bit of an entrepreneur and a bit of a player. And using his connections on the island, he manages to get 10 tons of sandalwood. And then on the 2nd of June in 1808, he boards the ship, the General Wellesley, and leaves Fiji. He had a bit of a thing for sandalwood.
He obviously made a lot of money.
Now, there's an interesting connection between well, Lockerbie and pretty much everybody who was alive at that period, but the one I'm interested in is his connection with the tyrant
Captain Bligh.
The son of a Plymouth customs officer, William Bligh went to sea aged 7, quickly becoming a skilled seaman and navigator. By the age of 22, he was sailing under Captain Cook. Just 11 years later, he would captain his most notorious voyage. And it's a story that was immortalised in the film The Mutiny on the Bounty. It's 1789, and Bligh is sailing the Bounty, a naval vessel bound from Tahiti to the Caribbean. By then, his reputation was that of a man with a volatile temper, something that would see him thrown off his own ship. The Bounty's first mate, Christian Fletcher, led a mutiny which resulted in Bligh and a handful of his loyal seamen being cast adrift in a small boat with very meagre rations. 4,000 miles later, the highly skilled navigator Bligh would sail them to the safety of the Dutch East Indies. But when he returned to England, Bligh faced charges over losing his vessel. Although acquitted, his reputation never truly recovered, and by 1808 he suffered another mutiny of sorts, known as the Rum Rebellion. And it is at this very moment in Bligh's story that our protagonist William Lockerbie steps in.
What can you tell me about Lockerbie and Bligh?
Well, Lockerbie actually was sailing into Port Jackson, which is Sydney, known today, and he had his own little supply of rum. Captain Bligh had a bit of a regime, and he didn't like this sort of activity going on. His soldiers of the day who came in to inspect William Lockerbie's cargo tried to, I would call it a bribe. Can we have that for $1 a barrel? And he said, well, no, this is not right. So the journal more or less says, no, soldier, not going to do it. And this set the scene for not a good relationship. He damned Captain Bligh, and this didn't go down too well. So he was sentenced to 1 day's imprisonment. And he didn't actually stay in prison. He bought himself out for a couple of pounds. A few days later, the soldiers that were serving Captain Bligh, for some reason or other, imprisoned him and sent him back to England to serve trial for, I think, probably corruption. And I'd love to know a bit more about that.
So there is a wonderful quote in the journal. This is William Lockerbie's recollection of that event. I feel myself more than rewarded for the loss of my £20 in witnessing the downfall of the tyrant. It was a fine, calm evening, and I expended a whole box of candles in lighting the ship fore and aft as she lay directly opposite. So you have to remember at this time, Bligh was held prisoner in his own house. Right out the front of it was the ship of the man that he had tried to imprison, William Lockerbie. So what did Lockerbie do? He lit the candles and he just stood there and went, in your face, Bligh.
Yeah,
celebration.
Cheeky
yeah. And that, to me, is the mark of the man.
Of this guy, yeah.
He's cheeky.
Very.
He's arrogant.
Very.
Right. He's a little pushy, but he's got the actions to back it all up. And so there's one more thing I wanted to cover off, because when you reached out to us, you asked a question about what more did he do in Fiji? Because isn't there a rumour of a Fijian princess or something?
There is a rumour that he married a Fijian princess. And seeing as he was on such good terms with the chief, it's sort of quite feasible. And I just wondered if there was any descendants called Lockerbie in Fiji.
And this is where we have to move from, documentary evidence, of which there's clearly plenty, just to speculation and interpretation. I cannot imagine him leading a monastic life in Fiji. It's beautiful.
Beautiful women, yeah.
Beautiful women. They're welcoming. He understands their culture. He's accepted. So we've had a look at your DNA, right? And of course, there's no Fijian in your DNA, and there wouldn't be because you're descended from William Lockerbie's Jane Lockerbie. But did he have any children on the island? We don't know because the records just don't exist. But at some point in the future, and it could be tomorrow, or it could be next year, you could get a match in the database with somebody who has a reasonable amount of Polynesian DNA. And that will be the smoking gun evidence that you need to know whether or not William left a little present behind when he left Fiji.
That's very
Thank you both so much for coming today and for sharing with us this wonderful, wonderful story of William Lockerbie.
Thank you so much. I've learnt so much. Absolutely brilliant. No, loved every minute of it. I learned a few things more than I didn't know before. For example, the number of ships that he had a lot. Wow, that meant so much to me to see a little bit more history that I just didn't know. I thought he had 5 ships. No, it was more than that. Extremely proud to be part of that story. You know, a long way away, I know, in terms of time, but I like to think a little bit's rubbed off. Yeah, why not?
So Val and Ian leave, not only knowing that their swashbuckling ancestors' boat-owning empire was much bigger than they'd imagined, but that Fijian sandalwood also made his fortune. Whether William Lockerbie had any children when he was on the island of Fiji, well, that question can only be answered in time. The sinking of HMT Lancastria in 1940 was Britain's worst maritime disaster. But because it happened quite near the beginning of the Second World War, the news was kept from the British public. Lorna Holder wants to know whether her ancestor was involved.
My name is Lorna Holder. I'm from Bicester, which is near Oxford. I wanted to find out more information about my ancestor, Donald Carroll. He is my grandfather's cousin. I went online, typed in his name. I just put the basic information that I sort of knew, and it came up with his name and mentioned the ship Lancastria, which was a ship that took a lot of the soldiers from Dunkirk. He died on that ship, apparently. I don't know anything about him or what he was doing. So I wanted to learn more about him and more information about maybe the Lancastria itself. I haven't been able to do much research on that side of things either.
Lorna, thanks so much for joining us.
That's okay.
Now, is your interest in one particular family member or in genealogy in general?
In one particular family member, Donald Carroll.
So we see Patrick there is your great-grandfather. We track and find his sister, Helen, and it's Helen's son, Donald. In other words, your great-grandfather's nephew. Clearly, the story attached to Donald Carroll is pretty spectacular for you to be carrying it today in the 21st century, 2018.
Yeah. He interests me.
OK, tell me more.
Because he apparently died on the Lancastria. It was a ship just out that tried to save the troops just after Dunkirk, but it didn't make it home.
Would it surprise you to hear it was, in fact, Britain's biggest maritime disaster?
I've possibly heard that it was quite big, but I don't know how big.
Because the ones that garner headlines, of course, the Titanic, the Lusitania also was another biggie during World War I. Both wiped out. But all those that drowned on the Titanic and those that died on the Lusitania, add those numbers together and you're not touching the number. They reckon that 4,000 perished on the Lancastria in 1940.
Okay.
She was a Cunard White Star liner, an ocean liner between the wars, and she was requisitioned, as many ships were, for the war effort. And lost her RMS title. She became HMT, His Majesty's trawler, slightly less glamorous. And it would have been a much less glamorous experience going on board her by 1940. A massive ocean liner, which was there in the Loire estuary to take home all the British refugees, so civilian, military, embassy members. The question mark is, we're sitting here now, and I expect a lot of people watching, like you and me until relatively recently, haven't heard of this.
No.
Britain's biggest maritime disaster. There is a reason for that. It's all to do with timing. Wartime, of course, distorts. The great propaganda machine takes over. And we have a big deal happening at the beginning of June, and that is the Dunkirk retreat. We also have another big deal who's just come into power, and that was Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
OK, he's been a premier for, I think, scarcely a month. And he started on his great oratory mission. We've had the blood and toil speech. We've had, we're going to fight him on the beaches and on the landing craft. OK, we've had all that. People are hooked in. The morale needs to be lifted. We've got the boys out of France, but it's a retreat. OK?
Yeah.
We're on the back foot. And on the 16th of June, the day before the Lancastria sinks, Churchill gives arguably one of his most famous speeches. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, of course it was men will still say, this was their finest hour. And what happens the next day?
Gets bombed.
The Nazis came very quickly, bombed 1, 2, 3 times. The ship starts to list in a matter of minutes, I think, in under half an hour. And then the 4th bomb goes down what's known as the smokestack, boof, detonates in the engine room. And what happens next?
It explodes and...
It explodes. You get over 1,000 tons of oil on the sea's surface. And you get more Nazi incendiaries, and then you have an inferno. So you have people, possibly like Donald, trying to jump, and they're jumping into flames. The ship goes down on the 17th of June. It doesn't come out until much later, the end of July. And I think it's leaked into the American and the Scottish press, of all places. And here we have, it's the 30th of July, 6 weeks later. And look at the tone of this, it's interesting. Lancastria, how they escaped. How survivors sunk by Nazi bombs off Saint-Nazaire were saved. So the positive note.
It started with the positive, not the bad.
They have. That's called wartime propaganda. And in fact, the second article from the Daily Herald, Tommies trapped in sinking Lancastria met death with song. What's that reminiscent of? The Titanic, the band will play on?
Yeah, because they're all playing, aren't they, as they're sinking, yeah.
So we're going to drip feed this into the media. It's going to get out there in the end, despite the censor. But hey, our boys are brave. Even when the Nazis are drowning them and blowing them up, they're singing. What is it?
Going.
Roll out the barrel. Yeah.
But when they weren't.
Well, we don't know. We just have to hope it was quick.
Yeah.
Let's now find out if your great-grandfather's nephew was indeed one of those men and women who perished. Here is Donald Carroll's Territorial Army record of service. We know from this that he joined up on the 1st of December, 1939. He was born in 1919, so by 39, a 20-year-old man, fighting fit, perfect. OK, the British Army would have thought. And indeed, he was enrolled to the Royal Army Services Corps.
Okay.
So we know that from his army record. Let's now go to the second document that we have, because what you want to know is, did this man board the Cunard, the Lancastria? Here we have Donald Carroll, and I regret to say it is indeed a casualty card, as you suspected.
Yeah.
And you can actually see the Lancastria is named there. He was reported missing on the 5th of July, 1940. Okay, so about 3 weeks after the ship went down.
Okay.
So we know he was on board in an army capacity, and he was reported missing. So he died. And no one knew about this. It was totally covered up. I doubt his family knew. The press certainly didn't know. Can you imagine nowadays something like this happening? So how do you feel about this story and having the family rumour confirmed?
I'm glad we've got it confirmed, so we definitely know it was definitely, that's how he died. It's obviously, it's tragic. It's not nice to think that a family member has gone through that, and I dread to think what he had to go through. But I'm glad it's confirmed and we know.
So I'm really sorry about Donald, but in a way, from his watery grave, he's served to remind us all of this epic loss. And by Jove, they deserve to be remembered, huh?
Yeah, I definitely think people should know about it, people should be taught about it, and they should know their history.
Thanks so much.
No, thank you.
For sharing that story and bringing it to our attention.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I'm sad that my ancestor Donald had to go through that and died on that ship. Also, glad that we've got it confirmed now that he definitely was there and that is how he died. It's a shame, I think, for the amount of people that died on that ship. You know, everyone knows about the Titanic, and there was a lot more people that died on the Lancastria, way more than the Titanic, and no one really knows about it. So I definitely feel people should know. It's affected a lot of people. But it's just a very big mixture of feelings, really. I'll definitely make sure that I tell the story of Donald Carroll, and my sons know about him, and my other family members, they now have confirmation, and I will make sure that they know about it. I'll definitely make sure that it's not forgotten in any way possible that I can.
Sad news, but after years of uncertainty, Lorna now has the confirmation she longed for. Her ancestor, Donald Carroll, was serving his country when he met his end on HMT Lancastria. Next up, who wouldn't like to have a connection to the royal family? Well, our next visitor, Beatrice Walter, thinks she might have just that, even though she was born in Germany.
I did a DNA test and I found that 26% of me is British, and I have no idea where it comes from, because I thought I was, well, more or less 100% German, Scandinavian, because my dad was tall and blonde and blue-eyed. I also found a couple of years ago a picture of Queen Victoria's youngest daughter, Princess Beatrice, and we do look alike. It's the eyes, the chin, the nose. Everybody who actually sees the pictures, they all say the same. And I do hope that there's some kind of connection, at least a little bit, to maybe the royal family, as everybody wishes.
Beatrice.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I'm looking at Beatrice up there, and I'm looking at Beatrice in front of me, and you really look a lot like Princess Beatrice.
The same nose, eyes, chin. So it all kind of like fits.
One of the interesting things about the royal family is they're not actually British. As you well know, they are mostly German.
Yeah.
And Beatrice, her dad was German and her mother was half German. So Beatrice is probably about 75% German herself. She was the youngest of Queen Victoria's children. And when Albert died, Victoria looked to Beatrice, and she was her favourite as well. So there's a couple of ways that we can go down this path and look for a connection. There's the family tree, and there's the DNA.
Yeah.
So let's explore both of those parts.
Okay.
So let's have a little look at your DNA results. A big chunk of Eastern Europe, right?
Yeah.
Not really a surprise, going on what you know. 26, a quarter of you is Great Britain.
Yeah,
right.
Which is quite a big part for
it
not
is.
knowing where it comes from.
Well, it's bigger than the bit of you that's technically German.
Yeah.
And this is where it starts to get very interesting. When we start to look at ethnicity and how it plays out in our genes.
Yeah.
If you look at these maps, you can see the bright green, which is Great Britain. You can see it covers the good part of the island of England.
Yeah.
But you can see it also covers part
Central Europe.
of Central Europe, of France and of Germany. So it's not that unusual to see Germans or even French people with British DNA. But if we're trying to connect you to the royal family through your DNA, we're going to need to get a sample from the royal family.
Which won't happen.
So if you could help us out with that...
I try my best.
That would be wonderful.
Okay.
But we're not going to get access to that. Now, that said, it might not be the royal family. It might be somebody who's more remotely connected to them, but a known connection. And if you get a genetic match with that person, then that becomes very interesting. But I want to go back to your family tree. We're stepping back here, and as you can see, German, 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 German. It's all very German.
Yeah.
Now, we haven't gone back a long way, and it's challenging because, you know, access to family history records in Germany is somewhat restricted.
And very limited.
Yeah, and very limited.
Yeah. And destroyed during the war.
Yes, yes, indeed. Some of them were destroyed during the war. So we can see there's a strong connection with Germany, just like the royal family has a strong connection with Germany, okay? The fact that you're German probably increases the likelihood that you're related to the royal family than if you were British. Because the royal family are not British.
No.
And so, whilst I can't conclusively say you are or you aren't connected, what I can say is right now, there's no evidence. But if you build that tree back, if we go up and back and out, if you can find a connection in your family to German aristocracy, that is your passport to the palace, right? And that's your connection back to your doppelganger.
Yeah, she is.
So weirdly, we're here in Britain and you have British DNA, but the answers to your question lie back in Germany because that's where the royals lie.
Yeah, so I try my best to find something.
Look, shake that tree. Who knows, a tiara might fall out.
Yeah, hopefully. It was fantastic to actually have that help. And we don't know whether there's connection with the Royal House of England, but I'm gonna do my digging now in Germany and hope I'm gonna find some royalty in Germany, which were connected to Queen Victoria and so on. I tried to find my tiara now in the German area and regions.
So to solve this mystery, Beatrice can't go down the DNA route, but if she can build more branches on her family tree and find a link to aristocracy, she might just get her tiara. It's been an exciting day in Somerset, solving mysteries and discovering lost family. But it's goodbye for now. Join us again soon when we'll be helping more people discover their place in history.